Tech. I'm Chad Groening.
A legal expert is calling on residents in the Washington, D.C. area to be alert to a proposed ordinance he considers dangerous to the cause. Charlie Butts has the story.
A public hearing has already been held on the ordinance, which is under consideration by the D.C. City Council. It would prohibit discrimination against people who support or perform abortions, meaning pro-life organizations could not reject them for employment. Clark Forsyth is senior counsel with Americans United for Life and says it also applies to hospitals who don't want abortionists on staff.
This extends to nurses and nurses' aides and medical assistants, and so any hospital employee, any clinic employee. It extends to pharmacists. It extends to medical researchers or students.
It would prohibit public statements from them against abortion. Forsyth tells AFN the proposed ordinance is overly broad and would seem to fly in the face of federal law that protects conscience rights for individuals, organizations, and
state or local governmental institutions do not have to provide facilities for abortion. State and local governments don't have to promote abortion. They can exclude abortionists from their facilities, and this would seem to work against that.
As far as a court challenge, Forsyth doesn't believe it would be struck down by the D.C. Appeals Court, and it might be immune from any federal constitutional challenge. So pro-life organizations and residents need to fight against it on a city council level. I'm Charlie Butts.
3 are dead and 24 are in the hospital after a major accident on Interstate 25 in New Mexico. Authorities said this morning that a car crashed into a pickup truck, causing that truck to cross a barrier cable in the median of the interstate where it stopped facing north of I-25.
The car came to rest in the left traffic lane of southbound 25.
That's Lieutenant Keith Elder of the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office. American Family News is available online at onenewsnow.com, on Facebook and Twitter, and download the One News Now mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Are you going to sign on to this effort to impeach Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein that House Republicans are talking about putting forward this week?
No. For what? Impeaching for what? No.
Inappropriate.
I've had my differences with Rod Rosenstein. I talk to him quite often, privately, which again is a lot more constructive than the public hearings we have. He's a Trump appointee. So is Jeff Sessions. So is Chris Wray. If President Trump is dissatisfied with Rod Rosenstein, he can fire him with a tweet. But to impeach someone, I mean, no, I would not be. I'm not convinced there is a movement. I read about it in Politico, and sometimes their sources are better than mine, but I'm not part of that.
Very quickly, are you going to investigate who the congressional candidate was who was in contact with the conspirators? This is named in the indictment.
I would love to know who that was. So I hope you'll investigate it. I'm going to try to find out who it is. Now, this is an unindicted. I mean, that's important. Whatever this person didn't rise to the level of criminality. But I am incredibly disappointed that any member of Congress would reach out to WikiLeaks or Julian Assange or Lucifer and try to get dirt on a Democrat. That is very disappointing. I don't know who it is, but I'd love it if you or I, found out who it was.
Wow. Welcome to the show. Stacy Washington. This is Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Yeah, so that was Trey Gowdy, and he was on one of the shows talking about a lot of different things that are going on here specific to this this developing investigation, which I guess now obviously it's still an investigation, but the whole tone and tenor has changed because with the indictment of the 12 Russians being referred over to another part of the government, investigative services and agencies, what are we really looking at here? So we're going to talk about that today. We have that and so much more for you today. We're going to talk about President Trump meeting with the leader of Russia, Putin, and how that has enraged the media. And there are some statements made by the president where I was kind of like, bro, what'd you say? And then there's some other ones where I'm like, yeah, that's the way to do it. So a very mixed bag. I don't think the president left anybody walking away feeling completely happy. And those who are enraged are never going to admit that he ever said anything that was decent or good or beneficial. We also have two guests today. Christopher Harris of Unhyphenated America. He's going to join us. And then we have Jenny Beth Martin coming on in hour 2. Going to be fantastic to speak with her as well. So Trey Gowdy says he's not interested in impeaching Rosenstein, who is a Trump appointee. So he feels as if, whatever the president's tweets may reflect, he himself is not willing to take part in that. There's also an interesting dynamic if you look at just the overall discussion of everything since last week. Now, I want to issue a correction, obviously. Friday, I said that it appeared that Lisa Page would probably be found in contempt of court because she hadn't showed up for her hearing. Well, she did have a private hearing, not a hearing to be held publicly in front of the public, in front of the media and cameras, and she did attend that. And so it appears that she will not be brought forward for contempt of Congress charges, and it appears that a lot of the Republicans who were present in that meeting and got to question her were very happy with her answers, apparently, even though she still had an FBI attorney present to represent the interests of the FBI. She was more forthcoming, if you will. It might be the nature of the closed proceeding that made her a little more comfortable answering questions. Whatever the case was, they were happier with her testimony than they were with the open testimony of Peter Strzok. Additionally, there's been a lot of interviews surrounding that, and it looks as if she will not be interviewed publicly due to the kind of raucous nature of last week's hearing with Peter Strzok. I do feel like, in giving it some thought and listening to some of the testimony of Peter Strzok over the weekend, I listened to a little bit more of it. Even though I was trying to unplug, I ended up getting sucked back in. And I have to say, the thing that would have been most effective for the Republicans on the committee would have been to have maintained a very low affect, a very, very laid back demeanor. And while it's always fantastic to get those sound bites in there, to ask those questions that elicit a response, because it was kind of a kangaroo court atmosphere with the Democrats screaming and lobbing insults and really getting outraged at any little provocation, even non-provocations, the better method would have been to simply open the door for the traps and allow Peter Strzok to waltz in, because these things aren't lost on listeners. People who are listening to this on C-SPAN, on their, on their cell phones, or maybe live streaming it on their laptops or desktops, whether you're looking at his face or not, you can still catch the different times where he was blatantly, obviously obfuscating. And so the theater wasn't required. I do understand what was being attempted there by, many of them, Representative Jordan, Louis Gohmert, others who, Gowdy, they got upset. They were outraged by what they felt was serious dereliction of duty on the part of Peter Strzok and others who participated in these messages, and the fact that their bias hadn't been acknowledged by Mueller. But the way to go about it, it could have been done in a different way that would have stood the test of time and would have precluded the Democrats from wasting so many minutes on their loud objections. That being said, I think talking about impeaching Rosenstein is a definite distraction away from heavier issues that have to be faced here. And I also think that I just want to call out, before we move into this next clip, we're going to listen to Nunez. He's talking about how Mueller knows the Russians also targeted Republicans, and he asks a question, why isn't that in the indictment? And that's what I'm talking about. One of the things that's happening with this entire investigation is, first of all, a lot of people who are Trump critics they're losing out on new criticisms of the president. They're basically, you get tired of criticizing the same person all the time. Even someone that is actively disliked, at some point, his detractors or her detractors will find that they're just repeating the same old things over and over again. At that point, you can choose to, decline to continue to criticize and simply state, for the future going on, I don't support this person, which Democrats don't support Donald Trump. No shock there. But what's actually happening is never Trumpers and some of those who call themselves moderates and are respected for their opinions are really coming out with kind of almost basic. They're dumbing down their criticisms to a more basic level. Donald Trump doesn't have any principles. Well, clearly he has some principles. Donald Trump doesn't have the sophistication to be able to deal with, he lacks preparedness and sophistication to deal with Putin. They met for 2 hours, which I thought in and of itself, that's a news story in and of itself. Now, obviously, the only people who get to know what they discussed are the translators and the two leaders themselves, and possibly Bob Mueller, because apparently their interaction was recorded, and Bob Mueller may review that recording. It remains to be seen whether or not they'll admit that he's reviewing it, and if he will actually have comments on what he learned from reviewing the audio of their interaction. But the point is, they interacted for 2 hours. That is a significantly longer amount of time than was expected based on the press corps' live reports during the interaction. I was watching those in my email this morning, and they were actually unsure. So they asked one of the reporters on the Russian side, and the Russian reporter said, yes, they're still together. We are now 2 hours and 14 minutes. And shortly thereafter, one of those Russian reporters told an American reporter, they're done. They weren't able to get verification from Sarah Huckabee Sanders until almost 2 hours after that, where she said, yes, they met for over 2 hours. So the contentious nature of the relationship between American media and the White House press pool and the president means that they're getting information secondhand, even though they're on site. They were at the location in Helsinki, Finland. So a number of things, moving parts are happening here. And if we get stuck in discussions about who needs to be impeached or who needs to be removed, forgetting the fact that President Trump can let go any of these individuals, as Trey Gowdy just said there with a tweet. So, if you know that, then you know that these guys are already, they know their feet are to the fire. They know they are heavily scrutinized and that the president is a wild card and he can let them go at any time. They're governing themselves accordingly. In fact, I think Rod Rosenstein, Director Wray, all of them understand the tenuous nature of the relationship with Donald Trump and that they're actually probably towing the line at the most they've ever towed it in their lives. And that's not to impugn their previous performance. I don't actually have a negative view of Wray or Rosenstein, any of them. Based on what? They've only become really national figures since they joined the Trump administration in these roles heading up these agencies. So what we don't want to miss in our viewing of all of this, these are a lot of moving parts in a very heavy news week. It's important for us to acknowledge that the information in the indictment that was leveled on Friday is information from a year ago, information that Mueller has had for over a year, information that was actually verified by the investigation that was launched by the Republicans and was issued in their report. So this isn't new information about these 12 Russians. Second, these 12 Russians are actually government agents for the Russian government, meaning they're never going to show up in the United States and offer their wrists up to be handcuffed so that they can go and undergo a trial in a U.S. justice system in our courts for the charges that have been leveled against them. This is really just kind of the closing of a loop. Yes, they acknowledge that it was done. But I guess the question that I have is the same as what Nunez is about to propose, which is, why not be comprehensive in the indictment and acknowledge that they attempted to influence the election from both sides of the political spectrum? They weren't really in love with Donald Trump so much as they were in love with the idea that the polarization that occurred gave them huge, wide, barn-sized openings that they could ride through and pit Americans against each other. So let's listen to him here. It's Nunez. It's number 6.
There's more in this report than what's in the indictment. Okay, and this is what's very frustrating. So it's great that they indicted Russians. Yes, they did bad things. I mean, they're always up to bad things. We know that. They have very sophisticated intelligence capabilities in Russia. And they're constantly attacking the United States and our allies. However, in the indictment, they leave out some really important people that they also went after. So the indictment plays like they were only going after the Democrats, when Bob Mueller and all his investigators and his lawyers know for a fact that they also targeted Republicans. Why is that not in the indictment? It makes the indictment look ridiculous.
Okay. So that
I'm not saying they shouldn't be indicted.
The
I'm just
Russians
saying that
were targeting both Democrats and Republicans.
And Republicans.
Yeah.
And they know that. It's in our report. So why doesn't the Department of Justice allow this to be declassified so the American public can see this?
The other thing is that these people are never going to see justice, right? I mean, we don't have jurisdiction over these people. They're not going to come to the U.S., and so they really won't actually be held accountable.
Right. They're intelligence officers, so they're not going to be held accountable. It doesn't mean, though, that we shouldn't call out Russia for attacking conducting cyber attacks on our system.
And we should. But the idea that this is somehow new and unique to the 2016 election, yes, the methodology used was unique. Yes, it was more widespread. It was clearly the apex of their efforts in hacking and all of that. But the Russians launched cyber attacks against U.S. interests, privately held concerns, and government concerns on a daily basis, 24 hours a day, as a part of their intelligence gathering and cyber warfare efforts against us. We may be geopolitically aligned in some areas, but the fact is we are the number one and number two, or roughly tied, nuclear powers on the face of this planet. And our posture towards Russia is one of aggression and defense. That's it. So it has to be that there's more than what we're seeing on the table. And so I just caution, if you care anything about this process, first of all, we should be praying not just for our president, but for President Putin, that he would be wise and that he would be open to conciliatory gestures from the president of the United States. And second of all, that we would be wise. We have to be wise when we're listening to the news about these things and understanding what's happening. We're supposed to be informed, and we're supposed to have knowledge about the topics that we're listening and absorbing information about and making opinions on. And so Russia is actually our enemy. Putin is, in all essences, although he's elected, he's somewhat of a dictator. And also, Putin was the head of the KGB for a couple of decades. So he's a spy himself. So the idea that Donald Trump was going to smack him around, and just get rough with him at this meeting, at this public, press conference that they had, it doesn't recognize the facts on the ground as they lay. We'll get into more of that. And News of the Day with Christopher Harris of Unhyphenated America right after these messages. Stay right there.
Hi, I'm Will Addison, and we are partnering with the Ministry of Preborn to save babies' lives through ultrasound. Here's how a nurse describes the power of an ultrasound.
Last week, just one example of a mom who came in was very abortion-minded, and when she saw the picture of her baby on ultrasound and heard that beating heart, it was a defining moment that just broke her, and she said, I just can't allow this baby to be killed.
By letting a mother hear her baby's heartbeat and see her baby in the womb, she will choose life 80% of the time.
I cannot tell you how many times a baby's life is saved through ultrasound. It's just an incredible tool.
Underwrite a free ultrasound and help save a baby's life. Go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Up next, Carol Swain with 2 minutes to think about it. From poverty to professor, from GED to PhD, a bold Christian speaking truth to power. Here's Carol with today's 2 minutes.
Hello, folks. I've talked to you before about how universities in the U.S. and other Western countries have taken a dramatic turn to the left in the last 50 years or so, with an overrepresentation of leftist professors steeped in cultural Marxism. As of January 2016, the Open Syllabus Project stated that Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto ranked among the 3 most frequently assigned texts at American universities. That's quite a commentary on the graduates our high-priced universities are producing. If you don't think idealistic college students sitting around reading Marx is affecting their worldview, then here's a headline from the Daily Mail. In London, students are lured to communism, says leading professor as student tells BBC Soviet Marxism failed because it didn't have the chance to develop. The article goes on to say that 18 to 24-year-olds see business and right-wing pundits as a danger to the world rather than communism. The big danger is that leftist professors have these kids captive, all born after the Cold War, seeing things through rose-colored glasses. How much more time did communism need to develop? 70 years of mass murder, oppression, starvation, and labor camps, not quite enough? 170 years would have just brought more of the same. We need to counter these lies with truth. And to do that, we too need to read the books that our children read.
To learn more about Carol and the Carol Swain Foundation, visit carolmswain.net and make sure you follow her on Facebook at Professor Carol M. Swain and on Twitter at Carol M. Swain.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Welcome back to the program. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Go to urbanfamilytalk.com. Don't forget to register for our Marriage and Family Conference, which is August 17th and 18th. I'll be there along with Miki Addison, Lonnie Poindexter, Abraham Hamilton III, and others. So you're going to want to be there and take part in the fantastic content we're going to be sharing with you. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome back for another visit with us here on the program, Executive Director of Unhyphenated America, Christopher Harris. Christopher, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Stacy, thanks for having me again.
It's great to speak to you. So I had a couple things I wanted to talk to you about, but before we get to those topics, can you tell me what your reaction is to the press conference between Presidents Putin and Trump, where everyone's losing their minds because President Trump didn't verbally beat down President Trump over election meddling and his illegal actions in Crimea during the press conference that they had?
Well, I have to admit, I was a little surprised that he did not go a little bit harder in. But then, that was the knee-jerk reaction. I mean, since I've had a little bit of time to think about it, I was considering it that pretty much it's a no-win situation for that, because you already have people who believe that there was collusion going on between them. And if he had stood up and tried to condemn Putin right then and there, would the mainstream media really have believed him? Or would they say, they would have said, oh, he's just saying that to try to dissuade people from thinking that he's a Putin puppet.
Yeah, they would have said it's fake.
Well, I was going to say, at the end of the day, it's like, only Nixon could go to China, right? Or only here it was Reagan who was able to bring about the end of the Cold War. And so I'm sitting back and watching the president and how he goes about doing things. And what I tell people is that there's no doubt when you watch this man that he is actually, and I say this in a non-negative way, he's an apex predator in terms of, like, this guy operates at the top of the food chain. And so Putin and Trump, they don't collude. These guys are competitors on the food chain. And it's just asinine to think, that President Trump is somehow beholden to Vladimir Putin, which, the left likes to project all the time, right? And Putin, man, I had to laugh. Putin put Hillary out there, didn't he? $400 million that Hillary got.
Yeah.
So, to sit there and say that, Trump's beholden, but yet in 2009 and 2010, it was Hillary and through the State Department, which obviously President Obama was aware of, that the deal was made to be able to sell the uranium. So the left is just projecting, Stacey.
They are. I just wonder, so the same people who were really, really ticked off last week when the president opened up the NATO meetings at the photo op breakfast, he chose that opportunity to kind of lay out the ground rules for the meeting, which it turns out he kind of threatened them and said, look, you won't have 55,000 troops in Germany protecting you from Russia if you don't start ponying up some more of the percentage that you said you'd give. Meet your obligation. that worked. They raised $34 billion in new funding for NATO, which takes some of the pressure off of the United States. Certainly, that's a drop in the bucket to what we spend, but it worked. But there was no need to negotiate in that fashion with his meeting with Putin, the first meeting, and people are calling it deferential. I don't see that. I see it as two people assessing each other, and there's a completely different relationship that they're trying to build between the leaders of Russia and the United States and us and the people of NATO, where everybody at NATO is basically eating at a buffet that we're paying for.
Well, you can't. I mean, it's one of those things where there's no way for President Trump to bully Putin. I mean, like I said, we're talking about peers. We're talking about people who are on fairly equal ground. Granted, our economy is much stronger than theirs. But at the end of the day, we have to take into account the fact that Russia still has a large nuclear stockpile. And so Putin is not somebody who can be slapped around. Okay, this is an old school Soviet communist guy who would love to return to the days of Stalin and Lenin. And so you're not going to stand up there and bully him. But yet, here's what happened. It was a meeting where they got a chance to look at each other and they sized each other up. And I'll speak from a male standpoint. Those of us who are alpha males, we recognize other alpha males when we see each other. And what we don't do is that we don't start barking at each other, because we know that if we go there, somebody's going to get seriously hurt. And so what you end up doing when it's alpha male versus alpha male, you're more prone to talk, as opposed to, just like, oh, we're gonna start barking at each other because somebody gets hurt. This is why the Cold War was a 50-plus year proxy war. Vietnam, Korea, South America, all these places, Afghanistan, these were all proxy wars because it was, and I hate to say this, but it was better for those little hot wars to take place in these foreign countries rather than a button getting pushed by the Russians and a button getting pushed by the United States, and then we have nuclear Armageddon.
So, Christopher, let's talk about the other big elephant in the room then. Besides the election meddling, which the Democrats are obsessed with because they need a smoking gun, they need some kind of crazy indictment to be leveled against Donald Trump before the midterms, or they are going to be unable to run on that. Like they want to be able to run on that. But the other issue is, and this is something that everyone is kind of bringing back up again, is the annexation of Crimea by the Russian state during the Obama administration, which is now the fault for that is being pinned on President Trump, who clearly he's coming into the situation so late in the game. What's he supposed to do now that they have a seaport and a bunch of other military assets there and they've actually annexed it? Are we supposed to go to war over Crimea with Russia, or should he begin to rebuild the diplomatic relationship and find a way to maybe get a concession for something else, because that's in the past now?
Well, I posted a little earlier, Stacey, that in order to have an intelligent conversation or discussion about geopolitical, socioeconomic issues, you have to have a good knowledge of history and geography. And I've said this to people. It's like when you look at you look at Crimea, right? Or let's take the Soviet Union. They had plenty of natural resources. I mean, the fact that they were almost broke and they couldn't feed themselves, that was because bad public policy, because socialism in and of itself sucks, right? Mm-hmm. But the only natural resource that the former Soviet Union did not have was direct access to the ocean. All their ports are actually up at higher latitudes that freeze over in the wintertime. So on the Atlantic side, they had to go out through the Baltic Sea, and on the Pacific side, they were up there in the Kamchatka Peninsula. So, they needed control of Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, in the Black Sea. But here's the thing. For their ships, whether it's their Navy or their commerce ships, to get out into the Mediterranean, they have to pass through the Bosphorus Strait still. There's always that bottleneck that's controlled by NATO. So what people don't understand is the breadth and depth of what all that means. I mean, it wasn't just being able to have Crimea. It was having access to Crimea gives them access to the Black Sea. Gives them greater access to the Black Sea, which makes it easier for them to get out into the Mediterranean, out through the Aegean Sea. So, I mean, there's more to it than just them annexing Crimea. And the same thing with the Nazis. Why do they want to take Poland? Why do they want to take France? Because if you look at Germany, the North Sea is the only way they were able to get out to the Atlantic. the North. So it's one of those things you have to look at it on a greater scale. And our university systems are dumbing down our students, and they're not able to think about it like that. They're only able to think in sound bites that the media tells them to think, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So, and just in that little, 5 minutes, the proof is in the pudding, y'all. If your kids are in a school system where they're only learning about character education and how to do math 18 different ways when the simple, equation method works great for grade school, then their time is being wasted because they need to understand that geography, as Christopher has just pointed out, plays a huge role in what nation states do around their borders. And we don't have this problem because we have the East Coast and the West Coast. And our neighbors to the north receive almost all of their protection from us, right? We are the military that protects Canada, even though they have their own military. Really, they depend upon the United States to prevent anything from happening to them. And Mexico doesn't have to worry about anybody bombing them because they've got there's nothing worth, fighting them for. Not their landmass, not their people, none of that. So it's really not an issue that we consider. But as you pointed out, he needed that little bit of land there. He needed that access to the water so that he can have a better situation for his Navy. It's kind of amazing that on all of the news programs, Christopher, we've not heard one person point that out. So the idea that he's now going to give that up is pretty ridiculous, right?
Oh, he's not going to give that up without a fight.
And we're not willing to fight him over it. Yeah.
I mean, that's not a place that you're... if you read books like Machiavelli and the Prince and everything like that, you start realizing that if you're going to fight, you do your best to fight on your own terms. And that's not a fight that's worth it for us at this point in time.
Not at all. And I'm wondering when it would ever be, unless we were already at war with them and we just wanted to prove a point, to hurt them militarily. So the reason he was able to do it, though, and this is the part that really, to me, stinks to high heaven, Christopher, is when do we ever see the liberals acknowledge that something that they felt was only a good, the election of Barack Obama, actually turned out to be bad for them in numerous different ways. But the number one chief point among that is that this is not a situation that can be remedied by an election. Just electing a Republican who's strong on foreign policy and foreign, offense, not defense, but offense on the part of the United States does not fix the fact that he annexed Crimea. Obama did nothing about it, and now the annexing is done. It's not like he's still doing it. It's already annexed. It's over. We have to move on.
Oh yeah, that ship has sailed, and it's one of those things. It's like playing chess. You can't go back and undo a move that was already done. The time to block that was during the time of President Obama. But remember, we had a president for 8 years who believed that America was the destabilizing force in the world, that America was the problem. And those who are followers of that leftist ideology, the shame is they're sitting there complaining about America and the relationship with President Trump and trying to say, oh, he's siding with Russia. But the reality is, if you are on the left in America, you're a socialist. You have more in common with Putin than you do with President Trump. And so I just think it's laughable that people would sit there and try to denigrate President Trump when the reality is leftist, regressive, socialist-minded Democrats have their ideological bed mate with Vladimir Putin.
All right. So excellent analysis. I want to get to this. So we have a couple other things. So Donald Trump was last week in Europe. He met with NATO. Then he went over and he hobnobbed with the Queen. Melania walked across the cobblestone courtyard in the yellow outfit and was actually the proxy queen from America. It was great. It was fantastic. We were all loving it. But two faces were noticeably absent from the proceedings when President Trump and Melania Trump met with the Queen. Now, obviously, her husband, Prince Philip, was not there because he has retired from public life due to his elderly age and infirmities, etc. But who was missing from last week's festivities in England?
The two beta males from the royal family. Unfortunately, the two males who are next in line to hold the crown of the United Kingdom, Prince Charles, firstborn child of Queen Elizabeth, and Prince William, rather. I'm sorry, I always get confused. Harry one. Anyway.
Harry's the younger one.
Yeah.
I think it's William.
William, I'm sorry. The oldest son of Prince Charles. And here's the thing. Prince Charles is has made plenty of statements that prove he's a hardcore lefty, that he's more of a Muslim sympathizer. He's a believer in global warming. I mean, he's a left-wing nut job, to say the least. But he's also a very weak guy. And it's funny, when you look at the strength and dignity that his mother shows, and then you look at Prince Charles, you're sitting there going, wow, I think that the Queen Elizabeth is going to do her best to outlive her son so she never has to pass the crown on to him. The only problem is that Prince William seems to take after his father. And so that's the problem. Is that Prince William's definitely going to sit on the crown, on the throne, rather. And he doesn't seem to be that different from his father, just a slightly younger version, maybe not quite as hardcore leftist. But the fact that they chose not to show up to meet with our head of state, I mean, on one hand, we can say we're insulted. The other hand, there's a reason why we separated from the United Kingdom in 1776.
Yeah. And it becomes more and more evident as time goes on. I'd like to point to another reason why they should have met with him, and it's really just for the historicity. So obviously, as much as we'd like for the Queen to continue on in perpetuity, she will eventually pass away and the crown will pass to her son. And for him to be able to say that, so the succession of presidents that have come to visit England while he was an adult and was, a part of that monarchy, that he met with every president that was alive during his lifetime since he was an adult, that's something that's an accomplishment, and it continues the line of communication between our two countries, which is of value. It's something that you want to be able to say. Now, Queen Elizabeth can say she's met with every president in the modern era because she's been alive for like 300 years. Well, you know what I'm saying. Yeah. So, but I mean, she's the one. She's not only the longest ruling monarch, but she has met with every world leader, and she's never turned anybody down. Like everyone, even in the midst of some of the most tumultuous times, when they sought a meeting with her, she would have the meeting, and it would be recorded for posterity with whatever the mode was at the time, since she's been around since before TV. And that's something of an accomplishment that now that they've allowed Trump to come and go without meeting him, unless he visits again, they're not going to be able to say that. And I think it was really short-sighted on their part. And like you said, really kind of pansy-like. We are so fortunate to have you come on and give your analysis. Thank you so much for what you do with Unhyphenated America. The website's unhyphenatedamerica.org. Christopher Harris, Executive Director. Thank you, friend, for coming on today.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Talk to you again soon. So we will be back with more. I got to tell y'all, I have a ton for you today. I have a ton of information. So we're going to get back into it when we return from this break. Head over to American Family Radio's website, afr.net. Find AFR on Facebook and hit the like button, you guys. Do it for me. Do it for America. We'll be back with more, and we'll take your calls, 866-963-2037. Stay there.
The Capital One commercial will forever be etched in the ear of the listener. What's in your wallet is a phrase that won't easily be forgotten. But this is not a Capital One plug. I want you to think about the people that are in your circle of influence. Who's in your circle is my new catchphrase, simply because we don't think enough about the people or spirits that we allow into our personal space. Negativity is contagious and fatal. Misery loves company, and it's fatal to your hopes and dreams. I think we all know someone who, no matter what good has happened, always has something negative to say. Ugh, that really bothers me. That bad attitude and that pessimistic spirit will only cause you to do the same. There's no room for doubt, especially if you're believing God to bring that vision to fruition. Now, this is not a license for you to be mean. It is, however, a license for you to assess who's in your circle and make the necessary adjustments. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Tony Johnson. Connect with us at urbanfamilytalk.com.
It's time to call your senators. We need to tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Senators respond to constituent calls. So call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible, it says the heart of the fool inclines to the left, just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk. Here's what you missed on Airing the Addisons.
I asked them, I pack all their stuff, and then I asked them to pack their own individual bags. If you have anything dear to you that you want to bring, that's your responsibility. I'm not doing that. You've got to do that. And a teacher's responsibility, you should do that. And so I said, JD, get your backpack. And he said, what should I put in my backpack? I said, put in your backpack what is significant to you, buddy. This is what you want to bring. Anything that you're going to leave and you're going to think, oh, I want that, you bring it. Can I tell you? So I was hanging up his backpack last night at the hotel. Can I tell you what was in his backpack?
What was in his backpack?
His Bible and the Nerf gun.
Hey, they cling to their Bibles and their guns. You gotta, at an early age.
That's so good, Will. That is hilarious. You don't know how funny that was. Buddy, you don't know how funny.
Airing the Addisons, 6 to 9 Central on Urban Family Talk.
And so I'm hoping that he doesn't use the gun while holding the Bible. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey,
anyway,
why not? Nehemiah.
We hear anybody?
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Speaker Gingrich, I can fully understand the idea of launching a trade battle with one or two countries around the world, the cruise ships still coming in. But does it make sense to be in trade wars or battle skirmishes, or whatever you want to call it, with so many countries in so many different parts of the world at the same time?
Look, I think if you apply a new standard, which is this good for the United States economy, as opposed to is this good for some kind of global system, you're going to be in a lot of conflict with a lot of countries. In the case of Paul Ryan, he ought to talk to his governor. It was Governor Walker who complained about the Canadians. And Governor Walker pointed out that the Canadians routinely do everything they can to hurt American dairy farmers. And that's where that whole fight started, was in a conversation between the president and Governor Walker. The fact is, we are the largest economy in the world, certainly the largest market in the world. We have enormous leverage. We have not used it very effectively, and that's going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable to have an aggressive president who really wants to change the terms of the agreement.
Of course it is. Welcome back to the show. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Why am I giggling? Because it's true. That's Newt Gingrich, and he's talking about this uncomfortability. And so let's be real here, okay? We've all been there. You're at a car dealership, and for us women, I'll just speak from my perspective as a woman. We're at the car dealership, and the negotiation for the vehicle is getting a little contentious, and the two men start strong arming each other over that last $1,000. They seem like they can't meet, and then your husband wants to just pop up and walk out, and you're kind of like, oh, it's only $1,000. Let's just get this thing done. And that's because women are more conciliatory. These stereotypes are rooted in truth. And for the most part, men are much more aggressive, and they're willing to go that extra mile to negotiate. Women get nervous about negotiations. I know for my part, I do. I just feel like, this is going horribly, and I just want everyone to be friends and promise to have coffee together. And so it gets really contentious when men get to negotiating about things. And so when you understand that dynamic, you can see where there was a point before last week's NATO meeting where Donald Trump, probably many points, but let's just take one singular point in time where Donald Trump is sitting preparing for the meeting with NATO. And he's a businessman, and he's going over these numbers. And so he's sitting with cabinet officials and people who know all of the history of NATO, and they're sitting there with the numbers, and they're looking, and they see that the United States is not just carrying NATO. We basically are NATO. And he looks at the assets, the resources, not just the physical costs, but the costs in lives lost for our soldiers. Because we often pay attention to when there's a major terror attack, or when one of our aircraft goes down, when someone in one of the Middle Eastern countries where we're operating shoots down one of our helicopters, or when we have a near miss, 2 F-16s and, one of their fighters, and they have a near miss, or someone locks on. This happens all day, every day. When I was in Saudi Arabia on my tour duty and I was working on the flight line, we would sit there with the radio and listen to our pilots talking to each other, and they would be locked onto in the no-fly zone constantly. I mean, it was just like every day. And they would land, and, I would go into the flight room. You're sitting there, and you're just waiting to hear, like, anything you can hear. And they'd be talking about how, getting locked onto when you're flying an F-16 or an F-15 means they've acquired a target, and all they have to do is push the button, and you're gone. In the movies, they always show people, doing fancy maneuvers and evading rockets, but that's not as often in real life that they're able to effectively outmaneuver once they've been locked onto a surface-to-air missile. So we would be sitting there listening to that, and it was real. These were guys we knew. These are guys, obviously, they were officers. I was enlisted. It's not like we had dinner together every night, but they were guys I knew who were married, who had children at home. They were on a 94-day tour just like I was. They were looking forward to getting on that aircraft and taking a 24-hour journey back to the United States just like I was. We wanted to go home. We were there to do a job. We were happy to be there and do our jobs, but we didn't want anybody lost. We didn't want any one of our aircraft to go up, get locked onto, and be downed, because it not only meant a military confrontation, but it could mean war. Actual full-blown war, which most of us just have no idea what that really means. Also, the number of troops who are lost to everyday incidents, car accidents, small terror attacks that don't make major international news. And sometimes we have people get murdered overseas. I mean, these countries are not like utopias where our troops go and they're completely insulated and nothing bad can happen to them until they get back stateside. So there's a huge cost in everyday loss of assets and lives that is a part of the cost of us doing business as the world's chief provider of military protection. So you got Donald Trump looking at these situations, assessing them, and he's counting the cost. Is it worth it? This is how many soldiers and troops and airmen and Navy corps. This is the number of bodies we lost last year. And this is the number we lost the year before that. This is the number of troops we have in Germany, in Great Britain. This is the number of troops we have on this peninsula. This is the number of troops we have on that island. This is the number of billions of dollars per month it costs to operate these military bases. This is the number of aircraft we need to order and have ready and functionally operational and have our troops trained up on with new guidance systems and updated military hardware. This is the number of aircraft we need to purchase to keep the fleet up to date to maintain our current military presence around the world. Sit down and have that conversation. Think about the bodies that are coming home draped in flags in the back of those C-130s. Think about the young wives and mothers and parents who are meeting those caskets at the airports around this country. Think about the cost. Think about the actual dollars that are coming out of people's paychecks and going to pay for our military and our presence on every continent on the face of this globe. Then see if you don't show up at the breakfast a little salty and ready to change the paradigm. That's what we're talking about here. And it's so immature to have the conversation based on what it feels like. There have been times where I've told my husband, I think you should go into that. We're negotiating for something for our family. I think you should just go ahead on in there. I'm going to stay back because I don't want to be in the contentious meeting. Or I agree, we're going in together. I'm not saying anything because all I'm going to want to do is diffuse the situation, which doesn't help my husband's negotiating position. He knows what number he wants to pay. I've got to sit there until he gets to that number, or we got to get up and walk out and go buy whatever it is from somewhere else. And every time I've left it to him to do that because that's his forte, it's worked out beautifully. Now, obviously, the United States is not married to Donald Trump, but he is the commander-in-chief. And when he goes into these NATO situations to make these deals, to call people on the carpet, to tell them, you need to put some of your bodies on the line, some of your assets. You need to take over more responsibility for defending your own country. We've held your hand and your wallet and your purse and all of your bags and all of your kids and all of your stuff for too long. It's time for you to start taking some responsibility for yourself. It's time to kick the training wheels off and take your first ride down the road with just 2 wheels. It's time to start riding the bike on your own. We're tired of pushing you. That conversation needed to be had. And so, we're really blessed that we don't have so many people who are doing all of this whining and complaining and talking about how rude Donald Trump was last week. Thank God they weren't in the meeting too, because they would have totally derailed it and messed it up, and the president wouldn't have been able to get the results that he got, which I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts that President Trump is mildly satisfied with that result, but he feels he could have gotten even more, and he would only be satisfied until everyone is paying what they've agreed to pay, and the United States is back to paying 2% instead of paying, almost everything. And this is what we have to understand. And so I believe listeners in this audience do understand that. I want to be clear. I believe you understand that. But I think we're surrounded by a lot of other people who don't understand that. People who pay full price for cars, who don't negotiate for houses, people who maybe they don't even own a house, they're just renters, people who don't understand what it's like to look at your numbers, come up with what you're willing to pay, what costs you're willing to undergo, and then to go into a space and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm willing to put up, and then stick with it. And that has to be the position of the commander-in-chief of the United States. We had 8 years of someone who was willing to walk into every situation and ask, what do you want? And then basically say, yeah, okay. Every situation, the Iran deal, the Paris Climate Agreement, everything he negotiated, they were all bad deals. And so, part of the problem that we have is that we have so many people who are so ticked off at Donald Trump and they're blaming him for a whole bunch of stuff like Obamacare. There's another deal that did just horrible deal. And Donald Trump's got to come in and take these situations, and he's got to try to make something out of these deals. He's got to take a pig's ear and make a purse out of it. Impossible. That's why he pulled out of a lot of that's why he's willing to actually just say, North American Free Trade Agreement, we just might have to go back to the drawing board on that one, y'all. I mean, Paris Climate Accords, not a real treaty. Don't want to waste my time working on that. We have so many bad deals for me to sift through and, get the good from the bad and try to make a real deal out of. I don't even have time to deal with that stuff. That's not even real stuff. That's just wealth redistribution. I'm not even going to get in on that. And, the liberals are just raging mad about the fact that he refuses to acknowledge climate change is a real thing. When it's time to talk about faux stuff like climate change, when all of your other deals are rock solid and killing it, and they're laid out before you, and you've gotten everything to a place where everybody's at least meeting and exceeding, and then you can move on. But not when every deal is bad. I mean, if you look at all of the deals that the United States is engaged in, they say Donald Trump shouldn't be engaging in all these horrible wars, all these horrible turf wars. He's got these tariffs going over here. The reason why he can't just do one deal at a time is because all of the deals are bad. And as soon as he starts messing with the deal over here, the people over there are like, well, we ain't going to do that. And he's like, yeah, actually you are. You're going to do that too. All of you are going to stop raking us over the coals on these deals. And that is what he's working on. If anything, you would think that the liberals would just be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give him that because we do need to make money here in this country. We do need to make America have prosperity because at the very minimum, we can all participate in America's prosperity. We can all participate in a booming economy. Liberal, conservative, moderate, politically agnostic. Even the commies can get down on some good GDP, 4%. You're just not able to escape participating in that economy. But they can't. They cannot. So you've got that going on. And then the other point I want to make, and I think this is something that they're so close to the situation. The media and the liberals don't understand that it's pretty obvious to see that if Donald Trump had Democrats in this country who were opposing him on, let's say his immigration policy and a couple of other things. But on foreign policy, the Democrats were lock solid and were basically saying, look, he's not our guy, but we support the Constitution of the United States. We support and American hegemony. We support American dominance because we make the best decisions. Whether we agree all the time is immaterial. America should be, in the forefront with a seat at the table at doing leadership. That's what we believe. If the president had that kind of wind at his back, where he knew he was supported by all Americans and both political parties on foreign policy, but maybe at home, lots of turmoil, lots of indecision on immigration, et cetera, then he could be even more direct with other world leaders and nuclear powers like Putin. But the president doesn't have the Democrats supporting his presidency on the foreign policy front. Notice I'm being very specific here. Democrats don't have to support Donald Trump to support American hegemony and strength overseas on the part of America. If he had that, if they weren't trying to unseat him on trumped up charges about collusion, then he could deal with Russia differently. But as it is, he has to play his cards very carefully because he's in the right. He's doing what's right for America, but he has to do so in a way that respects the lay of the land back at home, where he's in danger land constantly, because Democrats don't want to impeach Donald Trump because he's done something wrong or because he's actually colluded or because he's really an evil guy. They want to get rid of him because he stands at the gate as the only thing separating America from being completely obliterated by no borders and their goals of a progressive agenda that goes forward in perpetuity with no obstacle, which will result in the splitting of this country, obviously. I mean, it will result in certain parts of this country basically saying we're walled off from this. We're not a part of this. And Americans people aren't even considering that. Too busy going to Home Goods and buying all the cute stuff. I know. I was in there this weekend too. So when we get back, we're going to listen to the translator translating for President Putin of Russia, where he stands up at the podium right next to Donald Trump, literally an arm's reach away from the President of the United States, and says, there was no so-called election interference. We have never interfered, and we will never interfere with American elections. Yes, that KGB agent stood there and said that. That's who we're dealing with here. But everybody over here wants to talk like, transgender stuff. It's time to get serious. It's time to understand why these things are happening, to be informed and to be wise so that we can understand the times. And so we know how to pray clearly. All right. So, yeah, that's hour one. We'll be back with hour two right after these messages. Keep it here.
Family Talk. Secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Keith. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin answered questions from reporters after the two leaders finished their meeting at the presidential palace in Helsinki. The president blamed previous administrations for the poor relationship with Russia and believes that this meeting could lead to better outcomes in the future.
Nothing would be easier politically than to refuse to meet, to refuse to engage, but that would not accomplish anything. As president, I cannot make decisions on foreign policy in a futile effort to appease partisan critics or the media or Democrats who want to do nothing but resist and obstruct.
Putin denied any Russian involvement to interfere in the 2016 election when asked directly by an American reporter. And President Trump appeared to believe his statement, calling it strong and powerful. The United States is on track to become the world's #1 oil exporter by 2019. Steve Jordahl reports.
The International Energy Agency made the forecast based on expected U.S. output of shale oil, which is harvested from rocks containing kerogen and has the country on pace to exceed an output of 11 million barrels per day. Dan Celia of AFR's Financial Issues says that makes America not only a player in the market, but soon the top dog.
Market share globally is not that something that oil companies here in the U.S. have tried to go after, and now we are seeing that both in nat gas and oil, and that is going to be a growing part of America's economy.
He says the boom will not only drive prices down at the pump, but could also start what he calls an industrial revolution in the U.S.
One of the things that corporations want that may be planning on coming here to America is free-flowing, cheap energy. That's far more important to most manufacturers and corporations than is cheap labor.
But Celia cautions America's fortunes come at the expense of Russia and Saudi Arabia, the world's current numbers 1 and 2 oil producers.
Russia, of course, they have nothing. All they have is oil. The first place that they would try to do anything about it from a forcible standpoint would be in Anwar. Aside from that, the only thing they can do is to try to drive prices down.
President Trump is already angling to take some oil sales away from Russia. Last week, he chided Germany for getting natural gas from Russia when they could be getting it from their ally, America. I'm Steve Jordahl.
DNA has led to the arrest and the murder of an 8-year-old girl from 30 years ago in Indiana. Eben Brown reports.
It was April 1988 when 8-year-old April Tinsley went missing from Fort Wayne, Indiana. The body would be found days later. Angelo Manti was a little boy back then.
I remember even at that age, at 6 years old, the fear that I felt, that my family felt.
Investigators determined the little girl had been raped and choked to death, and through the years the killer left taunting notes, even on bicycles belonging to little girls. But DNA retrieved from April's clothes finally turned out a match, and now John D. Miller, aged 59, is in custody. When police asked him if he knew why they were there at his door, he simply replied, April Tinsley. Eben Brown, Fox News.
A video clip from a Chicago police officer's body camera has been released in the wake of protests over the killing of a black man by officers Saturday. Tanya J. Powers has more.
It has no sound and is edited, but Chicago police say the body cam video shows that Harith Augustus had a gun in a holster at his hip when he was shot by a Chicago police officer. It shows 4 officers approaching him outside a store when one of them points to his waist and he backs away. His shirt flies up and shows the gun. Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson urged people not to jump to conclusions.
Let the process play out and don't judge things on your emotion. Let the facts guide your decision on what you think.
Augustus did not fire the weapon, and the footage does not show him pulling the gun out of its holster. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com and download the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Once again, President Trump mentioned the issue of the so-called interference of Russia in the American elections, and I had to reiterate things I said several times, including during our personal contacts, that the Russian state has never interfered and is not going to interfere into internal American affairs, including election process. Any specific material, if such things arise, we are ready to analyze together. For instance, we can analyze them through the Joint Working Group on Cybersecurity, the establishment of which we discussed during our previous contacts. And clearly, it's past time we restore our cooperation in the cultural area, in the humanitarian area.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Head over to the website and hit the subscribe button. You'll also find the podcast there on my page if you want to listen to previous content or interviews that you may have missed. So welcome back to the show. And how can I say this? What did you think he was going to say? Okay. Did you think that Putin, a former KGB agent, a man who is so good at lying, it's not second nature to him. It's just something he does for kicks. Do you think he was going to step up to the podium and say through the translator, so you've got us. You've indicted 12 of our spies, our, Russian military agents for, hacking into the DNC and, funneling information to WikiLeaks. And here's the deal. Yeah, you caught us. We did it. What are you going to do? We can't promise we won't do it again. Is that what we thought he was going to say? In what naive unicorn world where the pigs fly and smell fantastic and are soft, buttery soft pig skin that you can also jump on their back and fly around to or take a ride on a unicorn? In what world, unicorn pig flying world, did we think that Putin was just going to, you know what? Now's a good time to come clean. You know what? I feel great. Now that I've admitted that we, tampered in your elections, I feel clean. I feel uplifted. I feel vindicated. I feel like I can go forward today and just enjoy myself. No, that man is not going to come forward and say that they did anything. And if he admitted that he tampered in our elections, he'd have to then admit that he does the same thing in European nations and the Baltics and everywhere else. Any place that they can have an impact in driving a wedge between any factions that exist in a society, they're going to do that. Because what they want to do is they want to destroy our bedrock belief in what they call democracy, but we call a representative republic, in the American experiment. Because the American experiment is what stands in the face. It flies in their face. It offends because it makes it seem as if they're not doing something right. And we all know they're not. There's something they're not doing right. But how do they battle that? Well, to subvert what we're doing. Because as long as we're running around, buying horse farms and doing radio shows from home and, women serving in the military and then going on and being Fox News hosts and MSNBC hosts and women like Stephanie Ruhle, who got a fantastic education and then she went and worked on Wall Street. She was a bond trader and she traded futures and, she was on the floor of the stock exchange. As long as our country is turning out people like that, people like Steve Jobs, he was adopted, raised in a tiny boutique liberal neighborhood where everyone was doing advanced computing and they had all these little funny computing classes for kids. And he took them and learned how to program and then started a company in his garage. As long as we have Americans doing stuff like that, they're going to have to meddle and interfere and try to subvert us in any way that they can. Just flying missiles over here won't do it. Attacking us from a foreign policy front, it's not going to do it. They have to come inside of what they consider to be something that is already contentious, something that's already a source of division and rancor, which is our political process. And they get in between that and drive wedges that way. And here's how we could stop them from doing that. Well, first of all, we could stop placing our political capital in people who are corrupt like the Clintons. If Hillary Clinton hadn't run for the presidency, they would have been going into what? Joe Biden's past? Joe Biden probably would have been the nominee. I mean, almost any other candidate on the Democratic side would have been cleaner and less easily corrupted than Hillary Clinton. Even Bernie Sanders. I mean, she basically was a gift wrapped, like it wasn't just a present. It was like when someone gives you a surprise party and you walk in and there's all these people there and everyone brought a gift. And so you glance over and not only is there a table full of food and all kinds of stuff that you didn't cook and you didn't have to put together and you didn't have to plan, but then there's another table stacked high with gifts. That's what the Democrats gave to the Russians in the candidate Clinton. And every time she runs for something, they now have their playbook because she has changed nothing. She has not acknowledged that her actions brought all of this on, that she was culpable because her activities were illegal and opened up the door for the hacking and intrusions. But it was also the DNC under her control. Remember, she was the de facto control mechanism for the DNC because she was funding it. She was in charge of all of the way it was run. All of her and her cronies. So if anyone had said, you know, she could have said, look, I was the head of the State Department. I know the extent of the interference and meddling that the Russians have attempted to foist on us. They do this 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They're also attacking private entities and corporations. What we have to do is we have to sit down, and we're stopping everything for 7 days. We're having a consultant come in, and everyone's going to have unhackable passwords. We're going to put up firewalls. We're going to secure our systems. And then we're going to go through and purge all of these private emails going back and forth. All of us, you know, emailing back and forth about inconsequential stuff that doesn't have to do with work. So you got to email that stuff on your Gmail account. You want to talk about Taco Bowl engagements and, you know, crack jokes, do it on your private accounts. But on your work accounts, it's strictly business. What time is this person supposed to be there? How many signs need to be ordered? What candidate needs these funds? We clean up our email because as the head of the State Department, I'm intimately aware. I know how these people operate, and I'm not going to give them an opportunity to come at me because I already have that email server in my background. I can't have them hacking into the DNC. I've already got my email server to deal with, and Donald Trump's going to bring that up over and over and over again, so we got to shore up these email communications. Just that conversation in and of itself, and don't tell me Hillary Clinton's not smart enough to do it, would have saved all of this. All of it. Because then none of us would have known about that stuff. As much as the Democrats have ignored the impact that WikiLeaks had on the election, they want to say it's the Russians. The fact is, so those emails, the emails about the Taco Bowl engagement, that blacks are the one ethnic group that can't be helped by policy. I mean, all that stuff. Donna Brazile admitting that the Democrats had not done anything for blacks on jobs, hadn't improved the situation on crime. I mean, and Americans were reading this stuff and thinking, man, these Democrats are some messy folks. But it was the Russians who changed the election? Yeah, they changed it by giving us access to their emails. But who wrote the emails? That's like somebody who robs a bank saying, well, I mean, it's the judge's fault that you know all that stuff about me robbing the bank because he's prosecuting me. No, it's your fault. You robbed the bank. You know, don't get mad because we now know you robbed the bank. There were people there. They saw you. They have you on camera robbing the bank. You know, it's not the judge's fault that you are getting prosecuted. It's your own fault for robbing the bank. The Democrats had unsecured. Podesta's email password was password. Come on. So you've got Putin standing there at the podium denying election interference, and everybody's mad at Donald Trump. Instead of them getting mad at Putin for lying, they act like he doesn't know he's lying. He is lying. He knows he's lying. It's not like someone said, say this, and he's like, okay, I'll say it. He knows he's lying because he's the one who told them to do all that stuff. So now I want to pivot over. You know, we've got the so-called future of the Democratic Party, which is Ocasio-Cortez, this 28-year-old girl who she doesn't know anything about foreign policy. But don't take my word for it. She went on this interview and she starts talking about, she gets asked this tough question, which is, you know, you're a democratic socialist and you brought forward a lot of really, you know, kind of radical ideas for a company that's rooted in capitalism. And capitalism has been very successful for America. It's brought a lot of people out of poverty and into economic prosperity, unparalleled economic prosperity. And so don't you credit that prosperity to capitalism? And she fixed her mouth to say something different. It's number one.
You know, the benefit of capitalism is that you engage in voluntary trade, and that because it creates value, it is the system that, unlike all the others, has lifted more people out of poverty over the course of human history than any other system.
Well, so I think that those things that you talk about, that you discuss, are part of the course of human evolution. And so I would hope that the most recent economic system, our current economic system, is the one that is most beneficial for everyday people. But what we're also starting to see is that, first of all, I think that when we talk about socialist or especially democratically socialist economies. First of all, they're done with the full input of everybody. You vote. It's democratic. So if something is not a good idea, it doesn't get voted for, ideally. And the other thing, too, is that we're starting to see that the people who create value in society are not experiencing any portion of the value that they are creating. And so I do think that absolutely capitalism was the most efficient and best economy, perhaps, for the time that it was at, perhaps.
For the time that it was at, perhaps. What? So it was great, but now that I'm on the scene, we need something different, because I certainly know better with my 28 years, not married, no kids, no real world experience in adulting besides going to college and running around and doing a smart social media campaign. But I certainly know better than a whole bunch of y'all out there who are in your 60s and your 70s, and you've lived a few decades, you've raised a few kids, you've been through a few recessions, you've lost a few jobs, you've made a few great moves, you've saved some money, you've invested some money, you've lost some money, and you put some kids through college and high school and grade school, and you homeschooled a few kids, and you've helped out a family member, and you've written some checks, and you've not gotten written some checks, and you've paid some taxes and some more taxes and some more taxes. Yeah, I know better than you. That's her. So I have a little more from her, but let's go to the phones. I love it when we get the chance to talk to the listeners. Let's talk to Zach in Mississippi. Thanks for calling, Stacey on the Right.
Yes, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
I do want to go ahead and just say that I really do applaud you for trying to get the truth out about the whole Russia investigation, and just to letting your viewers know that Trump is alpha male enough to go ahead and to actually get help from the Russians, to actually take all the loans from the Russian banks, to cause the hacking of the DNC and all that, but then blame Hillary for it. That's actually what real alpha males do. And so I just need all your viewers to know to, don't
Thanks for calling. Thank you so much for calling the show, Zach. So here's the deal. I think it's wonderful when people call in and they have witty comments and things like that. But if you have to couch it in a mocking attitude as if what we're discussing here is worthy of your derision, it makes me wonder why you're listening or why you're watching. And so you're welcome to watch and you're welcome to disagree, but do so in a way that gives respect to the fact that you're calling in and joining in instead of the other way around. It's not like I called into his show and, was presenting these ideas. He's calling here. So, all right, when we get back, we're going to come in with the remainder of Ocasio-Cortez's comments about whether capitalism is the way forward. It's a teensy little clip, and it just gives you an idea of how much she doesn't know about how life works. And then we're going to speak to Jenny Beth Martin, who's the co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots and a columnist for the Washington Times. So we'll be right back with more after this. Visit our websites at afr.net, urbanfamilytalk.com, stacyontheright.com. Yeah, we got a ton for you to do if you want. So head over there, say hi to us online, and we'll talk to you a little bit more right after this.
Hi, I'm Will Addison.
And I'm Miki Addison of Airing the Addisons on Urban Family Talk. Family is so important to everything. I mean, think about it. Right after God created Adam, he made family by creating Eve as his wife.
We'd like to invite you to the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference this summer. We'll have a full slate of experts to help encourage and equip the body of Christ to fight for the restoration of the family.
Our speakers include Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation, Dr. Clarence Schuler of Building Lasting Relationships, Abraham Hamilton III, Pastor Bert Harper and his wife Jan, and more.
We'll even be there.
The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference will be Friday and Saturday, August 17th and 18th at Hope Church in Tupelo, Mississippi. Come help us fight back against the enemy's direct attack on marriage and family.
That's the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference, put on by Urban Family Communications, a division of the American Family Association. You can learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Hello, this is Bishop Harry Jackson of Hope Christian Church in Beltsville, Maryland.
Jesus said, you would do greater works than he did. God says, hey, if you do my will, I'm not only going to back you in ways you have never seen, I'm going to protect, I'm going to provide, and I'm going to be with you. Start small, but dream big. What's dreaming big? Dreaming big is knowing that God is going to use you, hoping against hope, not settling that I got to do the status quo and do what everybody else did in order to get this little bit that I want. I'm just one of the little people. I'm a nobody. All the big people today were nobodies at one point. Everybody that's famous now came through that terrible tunnel of anonymity, of being looked over, passed over, refused, underfunded, left behind, rejected, dejected, subjected to whatever others wanted to put on them. But sometime, Psalm 66 says, of God, I have allowed men to ride over your heads, but I brought you out into a wealthy place. God wants to bring you out, me out, as we start small and dream big. We're faithful and we walk in his anointing. We let God dream his dream through us. We operate in teamwork to the glory of his name. We let our little ego take a lower place to his glory, and God, bam, shows up and does something that we can't do.
Join us this Sunday morning at 6251 Avondale Road in Beltsville or on the web at thehopeconnection.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
As we evolve, as automation begins to really take out extremely large industries, we need to say that we're not going to throw those people away.
So in the context of democratic socialism then, do you think it calls for an end to capitalism?
Ultimately, we are marching towards progress on this issue. I do think that we are going to see an evolution in our economic system of an unprecedented degree, and it's hard to say what direction that takes. You know, I joke
but it sounds you're skeptical that capitalism is going to continue to be the right answer.
Yeah, I think it's at least a question. I think it's absolutely a question.
Okay. It's not a question. People love to earn money and have the fruit of their labor be their fruit of their own labor. And the idea that this one little lady, this 28-year-old from New York City, who is the child of immigrants, wants to come here and reinstitute or install the same failed system that her parents fled. She wants to spread that around here in America. Just goes to show you that we got a lot of work to do with our higher educational institutions, because they're teaching these kids, these young, impressionable young adults, that socialism is the answer. They're teaching them communism. And so, again, you're going to do whatever you feel is best, prayerfully considering whatever school your kid should go to. But you have to say to yourself, if your kid's not studying science, technology, engineering, or math, then they're probably going to have a lot of leftist, hardcore, liberal professors who are giving them Mein Kampf and teaching them about communism and how wonderful it is. And that's where you have to be very wise as a parent, because those people will have your kids 5 days a week, all day, and they'll be having events with them in the evening. And if you want to keep your kid from coming home a communist at Thanksgiving, you should be rethinking those hardcore leftist Ivy League schools, the Big Ten schools, all the schools where if you're not studying math and engineering and concepts that can't be subjected to communism, your kids are going to be exposed to this stuff, and they have to be prepared to deal. And it's kind of like, why would you even send your kid into that environment? Like, why? So welcome back to the program. Good to be with you. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Jenny Beth Martin, who is always fantastic, co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, columnist for the Washington Times. Jenny Beth, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I got to say, I found the entire conversation from the past month or so about abolishing ICE to be one of the more ridiculous forays the Democrats have taken of late. So much so that I guess Paul Ryan said, yeah, let's bring your bill to the floor for a vote, the bill to abolish ICE. And a bunch of them said, the sponsors said, no, we're not voting for that, so don't bother to bring it. Like, they don't even want to be associated with it anymore.
Right. Well, they probably have, since they started talking about it, seen polling that shows that the American people don't support that. But I think also, I think most Democrat elected officials know that getting rid of ICE would not be a good idea. It's certainly not without some replacement that has the same charge that ICE has. We have to have a way to control customs and immigration.
Yeah, we have to have a way to stop people from beheading Americans. It's like, because Americans are not, that's not a method of murder that Americans are really into. So we find that when people are being beheaded, it's usually by someone who's a refugee, a recent immigrant, someone who's in the country illegally. All of these are the purview of ICE.
That's exactly right. And they're not the ones who are dealing with, from my understanding, they're not the ones right at the border. They're the ones who are on the interior still enforcing immigration and customs. So they're not border patrol, but they're the ones who are dealing with people who are inside of the country past the border and making sure that they are adhering to the laws. We have to have one of the reasons that Donald Trump is president right now is because he said he would get tough on immigration and make sure we enforce laws that are already on the books and secure our border. And that's a large part of why he was elected. And I think the left somehow think they can twist that and say, oh, well, we're going to abolish ICE and it helps us resist Donald Trump or something. But it's not at all in step with what the American people want. It is extreme and it's not right. It's not the kind of message that a Democratic Party needs to be sending.
So how does this look going into the midterms? Because there's been so much talk. Like I know you can remember just a few short months ago, it was a blue wave and we all needed to get, batten down our hatches and board up our windows because the blue wave was going to rush in and it was going to wash out all of this populism and Donald Trump and Republicans and et cetera, et cetera. But now it looks like it's just going to be a midterm election that, sure, we'll duke it out. We'll fight, to the last vote is counted. But it's certainly, the wind is not at the back of the Democrats, and they've had a number of opportunities to capitalize on issues from gun control to immigration. They really turned a story at the border that was a non-story into a national media frenzy with the children and so-called family separations. And they're still not they don't have traction when it comes to governing, when getting those votes.
No, they don't. And one thing that I said last year is that at some point this movement, because I think that there's definitely a movement on the left, the movement is to resist Donald Trump. It's against Donald Trump, and it's against and anti so many different things. But they're not for anything. They haven't told what they stand for, and they still haven't had a unified voice about what they stand for. I guess they could say, well, we're unified. Their movement is unified in abolishing ICE or unified in taking away our Second Amendment rights, but they're not unified on what they're going to do next other than just stop President Trump. And for Americans who are tired of the gridlock in Washington, D.C., I think Americans are wise enough to understand that Democrats will equal more gridlock.
So let's talk about the practical measures of that. And really, there's no way to discuss the midterms without kind of looking at what's going on with Mueller and his investigation. And so I was just peeking around the internet a little bit right before the show, and I noticed that something that's not really being discussed a ton is that so you have this indictment of the 12 Russian agents, but those indictments, that whole bit of the investigation is being moved over to counterintelligence. We don't expect those Russian agents to show up in America and submit themselves for, anything, like any kind of part of proceeding in our justice system. So at this point, is the investigation over? Like, I'm waiting for the the bombshell, the shoot a drop, and nothing is happening. If that's all they've got, and they've known about these 12 guys for a year now, then where's the there?
Yeah, I continue to wonder that as well. There's no collusion. There's no evidence that there has been collusion. And yet the investigation continues and continues and continues. And what we saw last week as we watched the hearing with Stork is that he's so biased, he doesn't even see his own bias. He can't actually get beyond on himself enough to realize that that not everyone in the country agrees with the way that he thinks. He's so shocked that people would like President Trump that he says they smell bad. You know, I was in Southern Virginia, and there's so many, I can smell the Trump people around, I think was what his text was, or something along those lines. Those are the kind of people who we apparently have involved in this investigation. And he's tainted the entire investigation. It very much seems like a witch hunt. They still haven't come up with collusion, and they're looking for other crimes, but the one that they said existed from the very beginning, they've yet to be able to prove.
Right. So I guess, so what strategy should I guess, like, let's play devil's advocate here. What strategy should the Democrats employ at this point? Because they've kind of cultivated a voter base that would want more and more leftism. Like, it's something that you can't get enough of. It's like the Turkish delight from, the books. It's you eat one bite and then you have to have some more, and pretty soon your stomach is bloated and it hurts, but you basically you need more in your mouth. You have to have more. So they're going for it. The question that I have is, like, at what point do they realize the kind of Pandora's box they've opened up for? It's a rabid appetite for leftism, even in the face of the fact that leftism does not work. Socialism doesn't work. Hardcore leftist policies don't work. Inner cities are, on fire in America. They're even now destroying the fancy ones they'd walled off, like San Francisco. It's now, you can't even describe it on radio, what the nicknames they now have for it. I mean, it's crazy. When do they explain to us what they think is going to be the end result, or pick something else to kind of run on for the midterm?
Well, they should have already done that, and it's not to say that they still can't. There is, of course, time for them to change course at this point, and so that's why the election is still months away. I have always taken the approach, working with Tea Party patriots and being part of the Tea Party movement, that there's a time and a place to be against things, and there's a time and a place to be for things. And if you go back and look at what we were doing at this time in 2010, you will see that we were not out protesting. We were out standing up for the country, and we were also mostly working to get out the vote, to educate people on how to get out the vote, and focused on what our issues are and what candidates support our issues. They are, and we always looked for ways, and I still look for ways to take our passion. And usually that passion is an anger. It's anger. It's very emotional, and turn that passion into something that is an action that's a productive action. So we always are looking for, how can we turn our passion into action? And it seems to me that what we're seeing on the left is, instead of looking for ways to turn the passion into action, they're just looking for ways to feed the passion and feed the anger and feed the distrust and just rile it up more and more and more. And I don't think that's healthy for the country. I don't think it's good for their movement either. But I'm not here to. I've decided I'm tired of trying to give them advice. I know what we did that worked. I don't know that what they are doing is actually going to give them the results that they want in November.
Well, I don't want to. I'm not particularly interested in helping them to win, but I also don't think that that you've got huge. People on the D side of the aisle who are listening to this show and going, there it is. That's right. The idea we've been, Right. So when I think of it that way, it's more from a position of, there are communities out there that are hurting socioeconomically, and the Trump economy has been fantastic, and it is reaching down into previously untapped areas, especially during the Obama administration. There were communities that were completely left behind. Those communities are finally seeing some upward mobility with this new booming economy. but there's still so much more to be done. And I wish we could find a place to have those conversations and to create ideas that are actionable, to do things to help those communities, regardless of the politics. And in some nonprofit areas, that's happening. You have people who, they don't care what their politics is. They just care deeply about school choice or educating kids from, low income areas. And there'll always be people that need help. But it's kind of disconcerting to see this continual, it's a death march to the left on behalf of the Democrats. And they're leaving behind so many of their constituents. And I even heard, Jenny Beth, last week, it was all over social media that the Walk Away campaign is actually just Russian bots. It's not real.
I heard that too.
Yeah, that is so not true, because I've seen the real accounts of people that I've known for a long time who are on the left who are now tweeting the Walk Away hashtag. These are real people. They're not bots. So that's another sign of danger when you're ignoring the symptoms of your own demise.
Yes, I think that you're absolutely right with that. And I think it's funny how the left is always looking to blame something other than themselves. So they call the Tea Party racist. They'll call people in the center right sexist. They fascist. Whatever it is. And now if something like this is happening on the internet, like Walk Away, which I have been watching over the last week and a half, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, those are just Russian bots. It can't be real trending. It must be Russian bots. You and I, we don't like women. We're a woman, but something must be wrong with us.
Right.
We must be sexist against women. It's ludicrousy. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. Instead of going back and saying, hey, what are we doing wrong? How can we appeal to people better? They throw names out and try to disparage their competition. And I don't mean competition really in terms of elections, but I mean we're competing for our ideas are competing with one another. And they don't want to look at what's wrong with their ideas. They just want to do everything they can to disparage the messengers so they don't have to get into the real substance. The fact is socialism does not work. Capitalism does work. And they don't want to talk about that. Tax cuts make the economy better. There are more people working now than were working 2 years ago. And the economy continues to improve. They don't want to talk about those things, so they'll just keep throwing out excuses.
Yeah, and my main concern is that we just I don't want to get stuck doing too much of the, we're bickering back and forth over stuff that's inconsequential. So in my opinion, the socialism stuff is inconsequential. But it is actually a thing because they're now electing people who are running as Democratic Socialists, where before it was kind of a novelty. Ooh, look, it's Bernie Sanders, everybody's long-lost grandpa. He's a Democratic Socialist. Woohoo! But we knew he didn't have a chance. He was running up against the Clinton machine. But now, in his wake, are these little tiny Democratic Socialists, and they're actually winning. And that's a concern. And it really brings us further away from those conversations we need to have to get real solutions for Americans. Jenny Beth Martin, co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, thank you for coming on today. Great to talk to you.
Great talking with you.
All right, talk to you again soon. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have some brief messages that are super important, so do not go anywhere. You need to stay right there because we're going to be back with more. We're going to talk some more about ABC's John Carl confronting John Bolton over John Bolton getting pulled from an interview by the White House. Oh, they're not playing anymore, y'all. They're bringing out their serious weapons to get back with the media. And then we'll have your calls, of course, 866-963-2037. I'm Stacey Washington, host of Stacey on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Stay right there.
More than 1 million believers have signed the pledge to boycott Target, and we urge you to join them. The American Family Association opposes the policy of Target allowing transgenders into the bathroom of their choice. Here's AFA President Tim Wildman.
There's a reason why we've had male and female separation in restrooms and fitting rooms for all of mankind's history.
A policy which allows men into women's restrooms and fitting rooms is not right, nor is it safe.
I think the human resources departments of these major corporations are the tail wagging the dog, because I just can't see corporate executives at Target or anywhere else sitting around a table going, you know, guys, I think we need to open up our women's restrooms for men.
Visit afa.net to learn more and sign the pledge to boycott Target. Don't spend your money at Target until they stop putting our family members at risk with this dangerous, politically correct policy. That's afa.net.
Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk. Who is today's urban woman?
Today's urban woman is about empowering herself, empowering her family to empower our future. We have a wealth of opportunities here in America. There are no excuses. Everyone should be able to empower themselves, educate themselves, and be stewards of our society. Today's urban woman, here to stay, and we're moving forward, never looking backward. I'm Deneen Borelli, and I am today's urban woman.
This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. Screaming children, angry adults, chain link fencing. The images projected across national media right now are disturbing unless you know the truth. Illegal aliens who enter the country with minors who are not their children are routinely separated and have been for decades. This law protects minors and is not new. Democrats are orchestrating this issue to motivate their base for the midterms. Gun control has fizzled out. The race card is tattered and useless. The NFL protests have destroyed their brand and left advertisers scrambling. Meanwhile, the Trump agenda is rewarding hardworking Americans with lower taxes, less regulations, and peace through strength. So what's really going on? Trafficking innocent children into the U.S. has increased by over 600%, and it has to stop. True asylum seekers enter through one of our ports of entry. Immigration officials are protecting minors in temporary custody from human trafficking and abuse. This isn't a new problem, but it's one Congress must solve now. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
This is Stacey on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
No, I don't think that has anything to do with it. And let's just be clear. Franklin Roosevelt met with Joseph Stalin at a time when activity in Russia was a lot worse than it is today. I'm not excusing present conduct, but it didn't seem to bother Franklin Roosevelt, and liberal Democrats weren't bothered at the time when he met with Stalin. So let's try and have some historical perspective here and not act like we have the attention span of fruit flies.
But wait a minute, I'm not asking whether or not it's legitimate or appropriate for him to meet with Vladimir Putin. I'm asking if the president branding real news organizations, real news stories as not real contributes to this effort that we see from the Russians and from other authoritarians to undermine a free press.
Of course not. I really, honestly, Jonathan, I think the question's silly.
Well, let me ask you about...
And don't say I'm attacking freedom of the press. I just characterized your question.
Okay, well, you were also scheduled to appear on CNN this morning, and the White House press secretary announced that your appearance would not go forward because a CNN reporter, quote, disrespected the president and Prime Minister May at the joint press conference. Is it really appropriate to deny a news organization access to a White House official because a reporter tried to ask a question at a press conference?
Look, in reality, I don't seek out the press. I don't talk to them. I appear when I'm asked to, and if I'm not asked to appear, I don't do it. And I don't communicate with them either, as you could find out if you consulted your friends in the Washington Press Corps, whom I don't communicate with.
So that's Ambassador, well, actually, John Carl on ABC, speaking with former Ambassador John Bolton, who is now working in the Trump administration. And what's funny about this interaction is that they act as if John Bolton books his own TV, you know. So when I go on TV, someone emails me directly, or they email through Project 21, and that's how I end up going on to a program. Or I'll get a text message, or, you know, again, email. Usually it's an email, and it's a request, and I go on. But that's me. You guys see where I am, what I'm working with, and that's how it is. Trump administration officials are booked through the White House comms team. They're not getting text messages to go on official White House communications or business to discuss something that has to do with the Trump administration by a text message for themselves. They're getting booked through White House comms. Same for cancellations. If they decide they're not going to have someone come on, they will email, and you get the email comes from someone in the comms team. I also know this is true because everyone we've had on who's a staffer or anyone associated with the White House, they've been booked through the comms team. They've either reached out to us and said, we would like to discuss this, or one of our producers has reached out and said, hey, can we get someone on to talk about this topic? And then they will say yes or no. And very rarely, maybe twice, it's been someone that I know that works at the White House, and I've asked them directly. And then what they do is they route me through to the comms team. They don't say, sure, I'll come on. They say, oh, that has to be booked through the comms team. And they will say, you know, so-and-so. And if I don't, they'll have that person email me. So this idea that he canceled, like what would be the point of Bolton commenting or having an opinion about whether or not he gets to go on a show? He doesn't care. He's on the job all day anyway. He can either do the job by talking about the show, or he can be back in his office doing, stuff he's got to get done he's got to get done, stuff that he has to get finished. This is more distraction, more distractionary tactics away from what really matters. Now, I know you guys, I love the Conservative Treehouse. I love their content over there. And they actually have, Sundance has done a big post over there about the Trump-Putin presser and what all of this stuff, like how it all intersects. And so I want to give you a little bit of that. And what we're going to have to do, because we have just this last segment of the show today, I'm going to push some of this stuff over till tomorrow that I pulled for today's show. Still important stuff. You got Hillary Clinton beginning a speech. I'm so tired I can barely stand. We're actually going to have to pay attention after last week's interview with, I can't remember his name, but he's a Hollywood producer and all of that. And he was talking about this possibility that Hillary Clinton, is like more than a distinct possibility that she'll run again in 2020. And then, of course, Dianne Feinstein had this amazingly difficult primary that she just made it through, but she lost the endorsement of California's Democrats for her Senate race. Again, they're turning to the left. They have to, because their traditional Democratic stuff isn't working, and the leftist stuff isn't going to work either, but they're not going to turn to the right. And then the National Guard deployment. You haven't heard much about that recently, have you? Well, it has resulted in the arrest of more than 10,000 illegal immigrants. And a quarter of the counties in Illinois have declared themselves gun sanctuaries. Whoa. So those, we'll get to all of that tomorrow. Today, I want to get into this. Ooh. So you got Mueller, Rosenstein, and the announced indictments on Friday. Now, remember, we talked about this just a tad. I said it was a distraction. It was odd that they announced it on Friday, knowing that the president would be meeting with Trump on Monday. It was if they were saying, you ain't going to get away with meeting with him without talking about this. We're going to put this in front of you. We're going to put it in the media, and we're going to feed it to the press corps. So they're going to ask you questions about it. The question was just screamed at him constantly on the tarmac, at the press conference, anywhere they saw the president's face, they were yelling questions at him about the 12 Russians and the indictments. Now, obviously, you still have hundreds of career left-wing D.C. bureaucrats who are still in place in Washington, D.C., who have the same kinds of views that we heard elucidated last week by Peter Strzok when he was forced to read his own text messages out into the record. Now, this is echo chamber joyland. Like, this is where they get all of the wonderful feels, the goodness, everything. This is apple pie for them, because now they get to keep saying over and over again, 12 Russians were indicted, even though to us Americans, that is the equivalent of nothing. That's like me saying, I'm serving cucumber sandwiches here at my house in a half an hour. You don't care about that. You're nowhere near here, and you probably don't like cucumber sandwiches. By the way, neither do I. So why would you care? We Americans don't care that 12 Russians were indicted, because we kind of thought if there was anybody doing cyber attacks, it was the Russians. We kind of already knew that. We're kind of right about it. What does it have to do with the price of tea in China? Nothing. You've got the administrative state really basically saying Americans are dumber than rocks. They're dumber than a bag of rocks. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these 12 Russians and their indictment out there, and we're just going to keep talking about that because that's really going to get Americans riled up because Russians have been meddling in the election. Well, I wasn't riled up in 2016 about it because I kind of knew that's what they were doing because that's what they do. And I wasn't riled up in 2017, and I'm not riled up now. And I don't know anybody who's actually riled up about it except hardcore leftists who spend all of their time on Twitter getting mad about stuff. Which, by the way, I just encourage you to delete the Twitter app from your phone. It doesn't mean you can't get onto Twitter. You can still get on there. But if you delete it, you'll be surprised at how much less time you spend during the day being angry. I believe that if I leave the Twitter app off my phone, I'll probably look 5 years younger by this time next year. Yeah, because I won't be angry. Not nearly as often. We'll see, won't we? So we've got this weird kind of echo chamber that the media is creating around this indictment of the 12 Russians. Meanwhile, what we know is that these Russians aren't going to show up in America to be prosecuted. And so this is basically an acknowledgement of what happened that we've known for over a year. So it's a nothing burger. It's like those cucumber sandwiches. Who cares? Now, we've got a lot of other stuff going on. Obviously, when President Trump was at the press conference earlier today, it wasn't, in my opinion, my favorite press conference performance from him. I wish that he would have been not combative, but just kind of matter of fact. You know how you can disagree matter of factly without it being combative? And just for him to say, you know, President Putin has said that there was no election interfering. We found that there was. We disagree. Maybe the reason he didn't do that is because he has some other things that he's working on. And how would we know? See, that's the other part of this that no one's willing to acknowledge. The media doesn't want to say it, but I'll say it. I'm still a member of the media, you know, in my own way. We don't know. So we don't know every objective the president had on his list. Everything that he said, look, these are the objectives that I have in this meeting with Putin. And I'm going to sit with him as long as I need to try to make some headway on these issues. Since we weren't privy to that, we didn't get an email beforehand. I got tons of emails from the press corps, but nothing about what the president's objectives were. He's been asked about it on television, on radio. Everybody who's gotten an interview with him has said, what are your objectives? He has always given generalities, meaning he doesn't want that information in the press for Putin to review and to be prepared to counter. Classic strategic move. Going into a meeting, you don't telegraph what you want beforehand unless the meeting is not adversarial. I mean, I just don't see how we're supposed to understand the dynamic that we saw on display. And everyone's characterizing it as, well, Donald Trump was so subservient to Putin today. I don't know. I don't know what they talked about. I don't know what the tenor of the meeting was. 2 hours and 14 minutes, just the two of them and translators. What could he have said? Anything. Sky's the limit. We have no idea what the two of them discussed, what kind of threats were made. If others were in the room, like if they had, you know, the head of the, they don't call it the KGB anymore. It has another name in Russia, but it's their basically their military and all of that all wrapped into one. They have one guy that's over that. And if we'd had maybe our Secretary of State and the four people had been in the room, the meeting might not have lasted as long, but we don't know what transpired. Now, at some point, I expect President Trump will come out with a statement or a summation or something of that nature where he explains to us what went on. But I'm just going to simplify it down. I tend to err on the side of trusting that Donald Trump made some headway in that room based on his prior performance. So his demeanor after the meeting may have been in big part due to, you know, he was disappointed. Or maybe he came out of the meeting with a new understanding of how really frightening and horrifying the leader of Russia really is. Because remember, we're talking about someone that the president met briefly on a couple of occasions over the course of his entire, you know, career in business around the world in international business, building properties. But this is different. Someone that you meet where you're just meeting them in passing and you're no threat to them, That meeting is going to be, it's basically like oh, hi. You could be anybody. Donald Trump was no one to Putin back then. Now, Donald Trump is Putin's number one adversary. We don't know what went on in that room. I can't stress it enough. What we're hearing on media right now is speculation. So, if you enjoy just sitting around trading in speculation and listening to people imagine what went on, then I guess the things that are going on in the media right now where they're talking about, oh, he's this, he's that. Donald Trump was subservient. Okay. But in reality world, we know that we don't know what they talked about. So you've got the Putin-Trump press conference. You got everybody on the left is just gasping and they're fainting and they're clutching their pearls. And they're really, really just, oh, woe is me. Donald Trump was so weak. The same people who were mad at him last week for being strong at NATO are now mad at him for being too weak with Putin. And if he had been strong with Putin, as Christopher pointed out last hour, they'd be mad at him. He made a fool of himself. Remember how they acted when he was throwing down on Twitter with Kim Jong-un? I mean, it was just like pandemonium. Woe is me. Donald Trump is on Twitter and he's throwing down and we just can't let this go on. Listen to the way he's a wild man. So he just can't win. So if you know that going into the meeting, what reason would you have as President Trump to, number one, tell anybody anything before you went in? Number two, do any confrontational type behavior towards Putin after the meeting in front of the podium? And three, even trust that whatever did transpire would be accurately reported in the media. None of those things are a given for the president. None of them. So you've got nakedly politicized law enforcement. And none of these Russians are going to trial. Rosenstein actually telegraphing what his true meanings were when he said that the Justice Department will now transition responsibility for this case to our department's National Security Division while we await the apprehension of the defendants, which is never going to happen. Never going to happen. American agents in Russia are not going to apprehend these guys, and they're not coming here to get apprehended. That's over. The Justice Department is going to take the next logical step. They're never going to be able to use any of this stuff against Donald Trump because they don't have any witnesses to corroborate any of it. So what I'm looking for is for them to wrap this garbage up before the end of the summer. What else have they got? And all the rest of us we can sit back and eat cucumber sandwiches if we want to, or whatever you like to eat, and laugh at these people who are losing their minds. That's the show. God bless. We'll be back with you tomorrow with more Stacey on the Right. Find us online, and have a great evening.
The views and opinions